Kenya's path to independence was one of the most violent in British Africa, because Kenya had a large white settler population who controlled the best land. The Mau Mau Uprising, 1952–1960, was the central event of Kenya's decolonization, a brutal conflict that the British tried to suppress but ultimately could not. Today we study its causes, events, and outcomes. The core grievance was land. British settlers had occupied the fertile central highlands of Kenya, the White Highlands, pushing the Kikuyu people off their ancestral land. By the 1940s, 60,000 European settlers owned 20% of Kenya's best agricultural land. The Kikuyu had lost their traditional lands and worked as tenant laborers, squatters, on European farms. Land alienation created deep resentment. Politically, Africans had no meaningful voice. The Kenyan African Union, KAU, founded 1944, led by Jomo Kenyatta from 1947, petitioned peacefully for land return and political rights. But the colonial government refused. Mau Mau was primarily a Kikuyu secret society turned liberation movement. Members took oaths binding them to fight for land and freedom. The British called them Mau Mau, they called themselves the Land and Freedom Army. The uprising began seriously around 1952. Mau Mau fighters attacked white settlers, African chiefs who collaborated with the British, and Kenya police. The violence was brutal on both sides. Mau Mau committed atrocities, including the Lorry Massacre, 1953, where over 100 loyalist Kikuyu were killed. British response, State of Emergency, October 1952. Jomo Kenyatta and the Kapenguria Six were arrested and tried. Kenyatta was accused of organizing Mau Mau, a charge historians now dispute. The trial was procedurally flawed. He was sentenced to 7 years hard labor. Over 150,000 Kikuyu were detained in concentration camps, the pipeline. Thousands of Kikuyu were subjected to brutal interrogation, forced labor, and torture in the camps. Documents released from British archives in 2013 confirmed systematic abuse. About 20,000 Kenyans died, approximately 32 white settlers were killed. 11,000 Mau Mau fighters were killed in battle, 1,090 were hanged, the largest series of judicial executions in British colonial history. By 1956, the military uprising was suppressed. Mau Mau leader Dedan Kimathi was captured, tried, and hanged in 1957. But the political tide had turned. The Mau Mau, though militarily defeated, was politically successful. The British realized colonial Kenya was ungovernable. Harold Macmillan, addressing the South African Parliament in 1960, spoke of the wind of change blowing through Africa. Key developments. 1959, Lancaster House Conference in London begins constitutional discussions. 1961, Kenyatta released from restriction, after completing sentence and then being under restriction order. 1961, KANU, Kenya African National Union, formed, Kenyatta as key figure. December 12, 1963, Kenya Independence, Jamhuri Day, with Kenyatta as Prime Minister. 1964, Kenya becomes Republic, Kenyatta is first president. The irony, the man the British imprisoned as a terrorist became the head of state they handed power to. The Mau Mau is significant for several reasons. 1. It showed that armed resistance, even when militarily suppressed, could force political change. 2. It exposed the brutality of British colonialism, the camps, torture, and hangings tarnished Britain's image. 3. Land reform eventually occurred. The Swinnerton Plan gave some land back. At independence, settlers could stay but under Kenyan law. 4. Kenyatta's transformation from terrorist to statesman became a model for other African leaders. For WAEC, State of Emergency 1952, Kapenguria 6, 150,000 detained, 20,000 died, Dedan Kimathi hanged 1957, Independence December 12, 1963, Kenyatta first president.